A new KARE 11 investigation uncovers evidence that Minnesota law enforcement has been sitting on a secret set of rape kits that have never been tested for DNA.
So the overall number of untested rape kits in our state is likely much higher than authorities have admitted publicly. AJ Legault is here with what this means for survivors of sexual assault.
Well, Julie Randy, we've learned that more Minnesota rape kits, possibly 1,000 more than we knew about, were never fully tested. That means crucial DNA information never got entered into a nationwide database meant to catch serial predators.
Here at Minnesota's top law enforcement agency, thousands of sexual assault evidence kits accumulated for more than a decade, never fully tested, and then, apparently, forgotten.
We have some records that show the number of untested kits could be much higher than was previously disclosed.
Wow.
State Representative Marion O'Neill helped pass a law in 2015 mandating BCA count the number of untested rape kits in Minnesota. Back then, BCA reported finding nearly 3,500 across the state. But as KARE 11 Investigates has learned, that's not the full story. According to the records obtained by KARE 11, the original count may have missed thousands of untested kits.
Surprised?
Incredibly surprised and disappointed. I'm incredibly disappointed.
The newly discovered uncounted rape kits were actually sent to the BCA from 2001 to 2012 and screened only for so-called serology, the presence of fluids, but never tested for DNA, never counted in the state's original list of untested rape kits, never entered into the federal database designed to catch serial rapists.
Many sexual assault cases weren't even investigated.
Jude Foster with the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault says testing for DNA and sending the results to the national database is critical to solving cases.
Could testing these kits fully lead us to serial rapists?
The short answer is yeah. I think we could identify patterns.
That's exactly what happened out in Utah. They started DNA testing a similar batch of rape kits, and it's led to arrests, including this guy, now charged with raping a woman at gunpoint 12 years ago. But back here in Minnesota, none of the kits have been DNA tested.
This is a tremendous concern. It means that here in Minnesota, we have serial rapists out on our streets, free to rape whoever they come across.
The records also indicate officials were concerned about what would happen if and when the news was released. The BCA declined our request for an on-camera interview, saying it is still counting the untested kits. For Minnesota lawmakers, the question now, how to make certain the victims behind the kits are not ignored again.
Should the BCA be briefing the legislature on these not fully tested kits?
They will be. The next time that we come into session, that will be a conversation that we will have.
Right now, the BCA is just counting these rape kits. They say there's no money to actually test them.
Key Minnesota leaders say the state's top law enforcement agency has failed to follow the law when it comes to counting untested rape kits. They're reacting to a KARE 11 investigation that revealed the BCA may have seriously undercounted the number of kits that haven't been tested for DNA.
I'm stunned.
That's former Senator Vicki Jensen, the lead author of this 2015 state law requiring a full accounting of untested rape kits. She's reacting to the news that the Minnesota BCA may have missed more than 1,000 kits.
I felt like we were not taken seriously. Somebody needs to find out what happened.
Lawmakers mandated a full count and detailed reasons why each rape kit was not tested for DNA.
My expectation was that we count them all.
Former House Majority Leader Aaron Murphy says a full count was important to see how much it would cost to actually test all the kits.
So we would have an understanding of what the problem was here in Minnesota and could figure out a path to make sure that every one of those rape kits was tested.
Back then, BCA reported finding nearly 3,500 untested kits across the state. But fast forward 4 years, and KARE 11's investigation uncovered records showing the BCA failed to include other kits they called partially tested for serology, the presence of bodily fluids, but never tested for DNA.
Should partially tested kits have been counted and disclosed to the public?
Absolutely. They had to be. We wanted them on the report so that they could tell us why.
So if a kit had not been tested for DNA, it was supposed to be counted?
Absolutely.
The BCA disagrees, saying in an email the 2015 count of unsubmitted untested kits and our review of tested kits are two completely different things. But just look at the 2015 law. It says the definition of an untested kit included any kit that has been submitted to the Bureau for DNA analysis, but the analysis has not been completed.
I don't believe the letter of the law was followed.
Murphy was one of the co-sponsors of the 2015 law. She doesn't buy the BCA's explanation that partial testing should count as full DNA testing.
I think for the public, and especially for victims, seems like splitting hairs.
We've asked for an on-camera interview with BCA Superintendent Drew Evans, but so far he has not agreed. Now, this issue of not counting all the untested kits is just a small part of what we're uncovering about missteps in the handling of sexual assault cases. Journalist Brandon Stahl and I are partnering on a series of reports we'll be bringing you in the coming weeks and months. You can read Brandon's reporting on KARE11.com. For rape survivors, delays in receiving a sexual assault exam can have dire effects.
That's exactly what's happening to some victims in Minnesota, and it can mean rapists go free.
I feel like my rape kit was completely mishandled.
Amber Rossett doubts she'll ever see justice because of multiple misturns in her sexual assault case.
There were many steps that the hospital could have taken and that law enforcement could have taken that they didn't take.
Jane Manning is a former sex crimes prosecutor. She reviewed Rossett's case files and calls what she sees a case of professional malpractice.
That potentially could have made the difference in the outcome of Ms. Rossett's case.
Amber says a coworker came to her house and they were watching a movie. She had just one drink of whiskey from this glass. She went to the bathroom, came back, and had a few more sips.
It's like things cut out. And I was so confused. Why was I naked? What just happened? By the time things started to come back into focus, he was throwing on his shirt, telling me very emphatically that we had a really, really good time.
Thinking she'd been drugged and raped, Amber went to the Owatonna Hospital last year to get a sexual assault exam.
There was no one in the entire hospital who could do a rape kit.
No one?
No one. They told me that they had to wait for this specific nurse.
Her records show the hospital twice paged a specially trained sexual assault nurse examiner, known as a SANE. But Amber was forced to spend the night in a hospital bed alone, waiting for more than 5.5 hours to be examined.
It was absolutely too long.
Experts say delays like that can mean a loss of crucial evidence, especially if a rape victim has been drugged, resulting in flawed investigations where rapists go free.
In too many cases, victims report to the hospital and are kept waiting for hours while precious evidence literally is metabolized away.
In Amber's case, BCA lab testing of her urine did not find evidence she'd been drugged. But because of delays, experts say some drugs used to sedate victims could have long been out of her system.
Every minute that goes by makes it less likely that testing will be able to detect what that drug was.
In part because no drugs were found and the suspect claimed the sex was consensual, the prosecutor declined to charge Amber's case.
They were done with it, over. Goodbye, go on with your life.
We found delays in seeing a sexual assault nurse, or the inability to see a SANE at all, routinely happens in Minnesota.
SANEs play a crucial role, not just in providing compassionate care, but also in collecting evidence critical to successfully prosecuting sex assault cases. Nearly all metro area hospitals have SANEs on staff and on call, but in greater Minnesota, they're few and far between.
In your part of Minnesota, are there enough SANE-trained nurses?
Absolutely not.
Caroline Larson is a sexual assault advocate in northern Minnesota.
We figured out that we have less than 10 trained SANE nurses in our service area.
Just look, that's for this huge 6-county swath of the state. And it's not just that area. Advocates tell us in these 5 counties in southwestern Minnesota, there are only 2 SANE trained nurses. Statewide, Minnesota has 141 hospitals. But get this, only these, just 1 in 4 of them, have a sexual assault nurse examiner program.
They should absolutely have a trained nurse.
Erin Murphy is Minnesota's former House Majority Leader. She's also a registered nurse and says the state can do better.
We should make sure that we have enough SANE nurses in the state of Minnesota to be able to get to a victim.
It could have been handled so much better.
Delay
So much better.
turned to dead end for Amber Rossett. Remember, we told you there were lots of wrong turns in her case. Her blood was never tested for drugs. Her whiskey glass was never tested for drugs. And even worse, turns out her rape kit was never tested for DNA. Why? Records show DNA profiling was not completed at the BCA because the Steele County Sheriff's Office said testing was no longer needed.
It's absolutely time to close the testing loophole here in Minnesota.
GOP State Representative Marion O'Neill says the loophole lets some rape kits go untested, especially in cases where the suspect is already known and the issue is whether the victim consented. Guidelines from the federally funded Sexual Assault Kit Initiative state rape kits where the suspect is not a stranger still should be processed for DNA and entered into CODIS, a database meant to catch serial offenders. Without that, law enforcement may not know if the same person has been a suspect in other consent cases in different communities.
One consent case could be a misunderstanding. Multiple consent cases could be a serial rapist.
I was never told.
Amber did not even know her kit wasn't tested until Kara Levin asked her to get the records in her case.
I was told that there was not enough evidence to prosecute the case, not knowing at the time that all the evidence had not been fully processed. And it's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous.
There's no straight answers with anything.
Tiffany Bowe is on a journey for answers.
It's frustrating, and I've cried over it.
This drive has been 4.5 years in the making. She's after records she believes will prove she was sexually assaulted, DNA results from her rape kit, and other evidence collected.
I need that, solid, you're telling the truth. This is the room that's curled up facing the wall.
Tiffany says she was raped in her home during a 2015 New Year's Eve party.
I remember the ball dropping. I took a shot with everybody who was there, and that was a really big mistake.
Feeling like she'd had too much to drink, she went to bed.
And then the next thing I remember is him over me.
Half thinking it was a dream, she says she tried to get up.
And I felt the bed was wet. And then it just kind of started coming back to me. So I just started screaming.
After wrestling with the decision for 4 days, she reported being raped and went to the St. Cloud Hospital to get a sexual assault exam. Police reports show they collected her bedsheets, talked to other people at the party who gave varying accounts of what happened. They spoke with the suspect, and he denies either touching or having any sexual contact with Tiffany. Case closed. Follow-up investigation needed? None.
I begged, I cried, I caused a scene. I was that crazy girl in the police station telling them just test the DNA.
But that evidence was not sent to the BCA crime lab. No DNA testing was done.
4 years. Over 4 years. Just sat there in a locker.
She told her story last year to the Star Tribune as part of a series about incomplete rape investigations. Then she got a call. Police were reopening her case. The BCA would finally be sent her kit and that bedsheet evidence for testing. But this summer, when she asked for records of the results, she got the runaround.
Now it's just been a back and forth thing with trying to get information and figure out where it's at.
Idaho has developed a tracking system that allows sexual assault survivors to go online and find out if and when their kit has been tested and who has it. Matthew Gammett, Idaho's Forensic Services Director, says victims can also request notification if a DNA match occurs.
It is a solution that works here in Idaho and can be replicated all across the country.
Gammett says 25 states, including Wisconsin, have already inquired about the software, and they give it out free to to any state that asks.
We will provide any assistance that we can.
But Minnesota has never asked. Jude Foster is with the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Currently, we do not have a statewide tracking system, which is problematic.
In 2018, the Minnesota legislature did pass the Victim Rights to Sexual Assault Evidence Information Law. It required police to put in policies and procedures to get victims information about their sexual assault kits no later than January 1st, 2019.
But when KARE 11 began surveying law enforcement across the state, we found a number of police agencies that couldn't give us those specific procedures to give victims access to information from their rape kits.
Tiffany was eventually told to get the record she wanted. She needed to drive 40 minutes away to sign a release form in person at the Sherburne County Attorney's Office.
You have an appointment?
She was directed through security to the prosecutor's office. And the form she was supposed to sign?
This is the form.
A blank piece of paper. She was never even asked for her ID and would still leave with nothing.
And then not getting anything. Not even sure if I'm gonna get anything.
A month and a half of waiting later, Tiffany did get her records. BCA lab testing found her rape kit had insufficient evidence. Remember, she waited 4 days to get it done. But the records do contain a bombshell. DNA testing on her bedsheets was a match for the suspect's semen. This seems to directly contradict his story of no sexual contact. Despite this evidence, there's no record the police went back to re-interview the suspect. And Tiffany got the news her case had been closed again. She recorded a phone call with Assistant County Attorney Lee Emmons.
I'm not telling you that I don't believe that it happened. I'm telling you I don't believe I can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Tiffany was understandably distraught by the decision not to prosecute. She hopes, at the very least, her story will spur Minnesota to get a proper notification system to help other survivors get answers.
Suspected serial rapist caught because one Minnesota city decided to test sexual assault kits that sat on shelves untested for years. So what's keeping other cities from doing the same? KARE 11's AJ Legault has the latest discovery in our continuing investigation, The Untested.
On the shore of Lake Superior, in Duluth's Park Point, a 19-year-old girl reported being gang raped in 2008. Her rape kit, finally tested a decade later, solved the case. DNA from the sexual assault kit quickly pointed to Dane Mullen, a felon with armed robbery on his rap sheet. In August, he was convicted for aiding and abetting the rape.
Obviously, we've had cases that can be solved, that can be charged.
John Barrett is Duluth's detective, now tasked with investigating cases tied to the city's 500-plus previously untested rape kits. DNA testing from the beach rape also pointed Detective Barrett to this man, Jesse Lee Fetchner.
Excuse me, Jesse? AJ Legault, I'm with KARE 11.
BCA crime lab reports show his sperm cell DNA was found on the victim's clothing. And not just that case. According to criminal charges, his DNA also ties to a 2011 unsolved rape. He's charged with raping a third woman in 2018. In court, Jesse Fetchner has denied the charges, but it's not something he wants to talk about.
I want to ask about all these women you're accused of raping.
No. Fetchner and Mullen are just two of the men to be criminally charged with sexual assault here in Duluth. All because, after years of delay, DNA testing was finally done on previously unchecked rape kits.
So far, 13 people have been charged. 5 have already pled guilty or been convicted. What's more, 3 of the suspects, including Fetchner, have been charged with multiple rapes or sexual assaults.
And you could say, yes, we've had some serial rapists.
It raises the question, is Minnesota missing serial rapists due to untested sex assault kits? There's no way to know. Duluth is the only community in the state to complete testing on their old rape kits.
Testing the kits is really important, and I think using them to make these connections is key.
Mary Faulkner is coordinating the testing of Duluth's sex assault kits.
I think we had to be honest about it, and we had to kind of be humble and say, We broke a trust with some of our community members by not testing their kids.
It's a trust that was broken across Minnesota and the nation.
There is no reason to not submit a kit.
State Representative Marion O'Neill is outspoken in her belief that as long as the victim consents, all of Minnesota's rape kits should be tested.
Absolutely.
But so far, that's not happened. Back in 2015, a statewide audit identified nearly 3,500 untested rape kits, but they're not all being checked. The legislature never mandated or funded testing. The BCA tells KARE 11 at last count, they have only received 467 of those kits to DNA test.
What's the problem with untested rape kits?
Serial rapists are left in our society to rape again. That's the problem.
She points to other cities around the country that have tested their backlog of rape kits and found suspected serial predators. Ohio found 300. Detroit, 800. Back in Duluth, 3 years after the rape at Park Point, another woman told police she'd been in Superior, Wisconsin, at this bar when 3 men came up and bought her drinks. The next thing she remembered was being in a Duluth basement, raped, as the male who was doing it told her she would not be able to prove it. But now, police say DNA tests have linked Jesse Lee Fechner to that rape, the second of the 3 he's now charged with. Cases like this have changed the way Duluth now investigates sexual assault. If the victim consents, all kits get tested.
Minnesota has received federal grants to test more unchecked rape kits, but so far, Anoka County is the only other agency to even begin submitting kits to be tested.
You are reacting on social media to our latest KARE 11 investigation about thousands of rape kits still untested in Minnesota. Last night, we reported that Duluth is the only Minnesota city to complete DNA testing on rape kits that sat on the shelves untested for years, and it is producing results. So far, 13 people have been charged. 5 have already pled guilty or been convicted. What's more, 3 suspects are awaiting trial charged with multiple rapes or sexual assaults. On Twitter, some of you were just outraged. Many said, how many more people became victims while proof collected dust? Jessica wrote, we need a push in Minnesota to clear the total backlog, end of story. And Mike and many others asked about the money, saying, is it really just the money that's keeping these kits from being tested? Well, AJ Legault, our investigative reporter, is here to answer some of your questions. So, AJ, what about that issue? Money. Is that really why these aren't tested?
The kits do cost money to test. It costs about $1,000 up to about $1,500 to test a sex assault kit. So money's certainly part of it, although the state has gotten federal grants to test. But so far, Anoka, the only other city to even begin testing. We also discovered for a long time, and in some communities this is still the view, police and prosecutors didn't think testing every kit would help solve their individual case. Take situations where both people admit sex happened and it's just a question of whether there was consent. They said the DNA results don't really prove anything. But as we discovered in Duluth, that attitude is changing because testing the kits and entering the results in a national system meant to catch repeat offenders can help establish patterns and identify serial rapists.
All right, it wasn't just about the money. On Facebook, Karen wanted to know, how far back do these go?
Well, the BCA says some of the rape kits date back to the early 1990s. And here's what's interesting, Lauren. Under Minnesota law, if a kit was collected and it can be tested now, the case can still be prosecuted. That normal statute of limitations doesn't apply in these
That's
cases.
even more reason to start testing these.
Absolutely.
All right, so we did get a long message from Jennifer, and Jennifer pointed out that some states have already cleared their backlogs and tested their old kits. So she asks, I think a question a lot of people are asking, just why isn't it a priority here?
Well, she's right in that there have been remarkable results when old kits have been tested. And we reported last night that Ohio had identified 300 suspected serial rapists. In Detroit, they identified more than 800. The question about why Minnesota hasn't done more faster is a question for our state's political leaders, and I suspect it will be on the agenda again when the legislature meets next session.
Yeah, you would certainly think so. AJ, thank you for coming by, answering those
Certainly.
questions. And if you want to find out more, check out the additional reporting that investigative reporter Brandon Stahl has posted on our website, KARE11.com.
It's a stunning announcement today out of the city of Minneapolis. The mayor and police chief disclosing that the public had been misled about the number of untested rape kits sitting on police evidence shelves.
KARE 11's investigative unit has exposed how sexual assault cases have been mishandled in our ongoing series, The Untested. Investigative reporter AJ Legault is here with the latest developments. AJ?
Unjustifiable and unacceptable. That's how the mayor and police chief described the revelation that Minneapolis has 1,700 untested rape kits after claiming for years there were less than 200.
We bring forward the findings today with humility and in the name of transparency.
In 2015, a state law was passed mandating law enforcement in Minnesota provide an accurate count of the untested rape kits each department had. MPD reported 194. We now know that was a gross undercount.
We had a failure in terms of the auditing process of those kits. That is unacceptable.
Chief Arredondo disclosing they've discovered roughly 8 times as many untested kits.
Right now, what I'm reporting today is that number is around 1,700.
It's a pretty blatant lack of respect shown to not actually go and inventory all of the kits.
Abby Honnold is a sexual assault survivor, now an advocate.
Every single one of those kits represents an actual human being, an actual human victim who experienced something horrible.
The natural question is how and why was such a mistake made?
And very honestly, I stand before you to say we still don't know to this day. But moving forward, what I can assure you is that will never happen again.
Mayor Fry vowed the city will move heaven and earth to get these kits tested, which could take as long as 2 years. For months, we've exposed how rape kits are going untested, leaving victims without justice.
Now there are plans to make sweeping changes to the law and mandate all rape kits be DNA tested.
As 2019 draws to a close at the state capitol,
There's a lot yet to do.
Representative Marion O'Neill is marking up bills, setting out to reform how Minnesota handles rape cases.
We have cases of rape where the rape kit isn't tested and no one does a decent investigation, not even a scant investigation.
O'Neill wants to mandate that as long as the victim consents, all rape kits get DNA tested.
I'm a pretty resilient person.
No more cases like Amber Rossit's, which hinged on whether there was consent.
I was basically made out to be a drunken slut.
Despite federal guidelines that DNA in these types of cases still be tested, law enforcement told the BCA not to bother DNA testing her rape kit.
It's absolutely time to close the testing loophole here in Minnesota.
The proposed new law will also call for the BCA to provide centralized storage of all rape kits to avoid situations like Minneapolis.
We still don't know to this day.
Where they lost track of more than 1,500 untested kits. And remember Tiffany Bowe?
This is the form.
Who just wanted answers about her case? O'Neill's legislation would create a statewide online database so victims can easily track what's happening with their rape kit, pointing to the serial rape suspects found in Ohio and Detroit and Duluth.
I want to ask about all these women you're accused of raping.
Representative O'Neill says the stakes are too high to do nothing.
I can guarantee you that there are serial rapists going undetected in Minnesota.
That reform legislation will be officially introduced in February. Meanwhile, victims of sexual assault who need help can head to rapehelpmn.org to find an advocate.
A new audit of untested rape kits in Minneapolis finds the backlog is even larger than previously disclosed. Investigative reporter AJ Legault is here with the update in our continuing investigation, The Untested. AJ?
Yeah, Randy, the new audit also confirms a KARE 11 investigation that revealed Minneapolis and communities across Minnesota have been in violation of state law requiring victims be able to easily access information about their case.
You may recall the bombshell announcement back in November at Minneapolis City Hall.
We had a failure in terms of the auditing process of those kits. That is unacceptable.
The police chief and mayor revealing the city had 1,700 untested rape kits, after the department claimed for years there were less than 200. Now, this internal audit identified another 75 kits needing to be added to the backlog. It also found a series of high-risk deficiencies with how sex assault kits are handled that require immediate corrective action. One of the big issues identified was the subject of a Care 11 investigation that exposed how police agencies across the state were failing to follow the victim rights to sexual assault evidence law, forcing victims like Tiffany Bowe
It's frustrating, and I've cried over it.
to call and drive all over just to get information that's supposed to be readily provided.
Now it's just been a back and forth thing with trying to get information and figure out where it's at.
A number of other states have already created a statewide sexual assault kit tracking system. The auditor writes, that's what Minnesota should consider doing.
The Minneapolis City Council recently approved $200,000 to hire new analysts at the BCA to help test their backlog, but it's expected that will take as long as 2 years. It's a time frame that's drawing sharp criticism from some city leaders.
For years, our state and states all over the country have had to face a disturbing problem. Rape kits in the hands of police departments were going untested. It was such an issue that in 2015, our state legislature told all police departments, tell us how many have not been done so the work could be done to get them done. During that year and in the time since, our investigative team has been digging into this issue, and tonight we want to get you up to speed. Since 2015, our investigative team has been investigating the issue of untested rape kits.
Our investigative unit started looking into issues when we got a tip that kits had not been properly counted.
You told them the counts were off, and then
in November, the Minneapolis Police Department and the Minneapolis mayor dropped a bombshell. Minneapolis police had previously told everybody in the state we have less than 200 untested kits. And now they were saying, oh, actually, we've got 1,700.
Wow. Why?
We don't know why. They did not count them properly. They were stored in multiple locations. They failed to properly audit their untested rape kits.
When the Minneapolis mayor and chief revealed this, they called the errors unjustifiable and unacceptable. How old are these kits that we're talking about? How many years do they go back?
In Minneapolis, these untested kits date back to 1988.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did victims know their kits were not tested?
Most did not. Most of them had no clue that they hadn't been tested. They reported it to police. They went to the hospital. They had this incredibly invasive exam done to gather evidence. Their bodies became evidence. And most victims assume, hey, that kit got sent and it was DNA tested. And the reality is that didn't always happen.
So beyond the why of not testing them, some of you might be asking, why does it matter now?
We need to test these kits because we are allowing serial rapists to go free. That's what the data shows has happened.
The data AJ is talking about is this: cities and states that have tested the backlog of rape kits that sat on the shelves for years are catching offenders. Duluth tested its backlog of kits, and the result? Several men in turn pleaded guilty to or were found guilty of sexual assaults. In Detroit, after testing 11,000 kits, 824 serial rapists were identified. In Ohio, 14,000 old kits were tested, and 300 serial offenders were identified. Which brings us back to the untested kits in Minneapolis.
These kits are being sent to the BCA, and right now the city has approved a couple $100,000 to actually hire new scientists to work at the BCA to test the kits from Minneapolis's backlog specifically.
So who pays for it?
The local taxpayers from the community. And the BCA is funded by taxpayer dollars, and the police agencies. There is a cost to do this. There's science involved.
The cost. So back in November, I got an email from one of you furious about the untested rape kits in Minneapolis. You said you wanted to raise money to get them tested. I was skeptical that you should even try, and if that money could even be used. Well, I was wrong. It is an incredible story of perseverance and honest to goodness, and you're going to hear that woman's story on this show tomorrow night. And then tomorrow night at 10, AJ and our investigative team will tell you another disturbing aspect to this ongoing story. Not only are rape kits not being tested or put on the shelf somewhere, some have just been destroyed. And that is not something that is going over well with the victims who had those rape kits done. Minnesota recently received a $2 million federal grant to test the state's backlog of rape kits. But a new KARE 11 investigation discovers hundreds of untested rape kits have already been destroyed, leaving survivors with no chance at ever seeing justice. Here's AJ Legault with the latest chapter in their ongoing investigation, The Untested.
And it makes me so angry. Like, it's not okay.
What has Michelle Johnson so angry is learning that her rape kit, evidence collected from her body after reporting she had been sexually assaulted, has been destroyed.
All the hope I had was the one thing I had left is gone. And it breaks my heart.
In 2014, she invited a man she'd met online to her Brainerd apartment. She says she told him nothing physical was going to take place, but he became insistent. She told police she consented to one specific act, thinking he would stop pressuring her to have intercourse. But it didn't stop there.
He pinned me down and forced me, and I told him, no, I don't want to do this, and I told him no.
Michelle went to the local emergency room to have a rape exam performed. Brainerd police came and took her statement. Reports show they called the suspect, who told them he felt it was consensual.
Suspect in the case said this sex was consensual.
No. No.
Even though the suspect never showed up for his formal interview and stopped returning the detective's phone calls, that's where the police investigation ended. The Crow Wing County attorney sent Michelle a letter stating there just wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. But she held out hope, thinking her rape kit had been sent to the BCA to be tested, and the suspect's DNA entered into the federal database meant to catch serial offenders. If he did it again, maybe her case could be revived.
That was the one thing I had to hold on to, was that that kit was tested, they have evidence.
Not only was her kit never tested, KARE 11's investigation discovered Brainerd police destroyed it, along with dozens of others.
Knowing that they didn't even bother, they didn't test it, they destroyed it, that angers me and it hurts me and it just kills me.
Brainerd police would not do an on-camera interview. Our investigation found, despite federal guidelines that these rape kits should be kept for 50 years, communities across Minnesota have been destroying them. It's happened in Eagan, in Plymouth, in Woodbury. Hundreds of cases where victims now have no shot at ever seeing justice, and you can watch our complete investigation tonight on KARE 11 News at 10.
AJ, you said Brainerd wouldn't talk to you. Any luck on anyone else talking to you, answering that big question we all have? Why get rid of them?
Now, some of them have spoken with Brandon, not on camera.
Okay.
The biggest question really we had was why? Why is this happening? And we found it happened most often. They destroyed kits in what are called consent cases, where both parties, the victim and the suspect, acknowledge that sex happened, and the suspect says it was consensual. And so DNA won't really solve the case. And Brandon, you can explain why that is short-sighted.
That's short-sighted because what you can do with these kits is take the DNA information and upload them into a federal database that is used to search for serial offenders.
Okay.
And often we have found, even in Minnesota, that you can track and catch serial offenders using this database.
And not just here, like you said, that database goes all over the country.
All over the country, and that's really the only database that we have to do such a thing.
One of the state lawmakers gave us a great quote when we started sharing some of this, and that was that one consent case might be a misunderstanding, but if you have someone who's involved in multiple consent cases, you've got a serial rapist.
You have a pattern.
Wow. I'm sure you obviously spoke to that woman. One question that's been in my mind are, do these women or men, if they have been victims in some of these cases, get notified of what's happening with their kit along the way, much like we track a package?
No. Every victim that we've spoken with, they were never told that their kit had been destroyed. And
they didn't know they hadn't been tested.
Right, no, that's absolutely correct. So it was just absolutely devastating for them to hear this.
And last question for you, AJ, you mentioned that federal, is it a guideline? Like, can the state departments be in trouble for getting rid of these?
It is a federal guideline, a best practice. So what we found is agencies are not following federal best practices.
So they're really not violating anything.
There is no law, but there is a law that's going to be introduced next week, we're told, here in Minnesota, that will mandate all rape kits get tested. It's going to be proposed, and lawmakers will have a chance to debate it.
All right, that'll be interesting. I'm sure you'll both follow up on that, and we'll look
Definitely.
forward to talking to you about it again. Thank you so much for your work,
you,
guys.
Jenna.
Their
Thank you,
story
Jenna.
tonight at 10 o'clock. We'll be right back.
Despite a $2 million federal grant to test the state's backlog of rape kits, KARE 11 Investigates discovers hundreds of them have been destroyed without being tested. AJ Legault looks into why and how it's leaving survivors with little or no chance for justice.
An MMA fighter. Police and court records show Marcel McCullough also has a decade-long history.
He punched me.
Of punching below his weight,
I had blood all over my neck.
leaving a trail of bruised and battered women from Minnesota to Florida to Colorado.
He just ripped her out of the car by her hair.
That's where he's now in prison for beating his girlfriend, breaking her arm,
She's screaming, crying.
then fleeing in a wild, high-speed getaway in a stolen car.
I've got a car at 300 miles an hour, just crashed.
Before that, Marcel was a bouncer in 2011 at a downtown Minneapolis club when he met a college student and invited her to his Shenandoah Lane home in Plymouth.
And I had no idea about his past.
What the woman, who we're not identifying, did not know was McCullough had already been convicted of assault 4 times. In one charge, dropped as part of a plea deal, he was accused of asking a woman to have sex, and when she refused, punching her in the face. Back to our student, who claimed that night in Plymouth, McCullough raped her while she told him no and screamed loudly for him to stop.
There was really not much I could do. It was like trying to move a brick wall.
She reported to Plymouth police and went to North Memorial Hospital to get a rape exam.
I didn't want anyone to touch me, but I knew that's what had to be done to collect evidence.
Police reports show a detective called McCullough who said no one was raped, no one was sexually assaulted, but he refused to meet with investigators. For 10 months, they tried to catch up with him to serve search warrants to get his DNA. Despite the fact that part of the time he was behind bars on other charges here in Minnesota and even had this public fight in downtown Minneapolis, they never found him. He was never arrested. Without even testing the rape kit, the case was turned over to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, which declined to prosecute.
And now it's too late.
Too late. Our investigation discovered her case here in Plymouth is one of just hundreds across Minnesota where police destroyed untested rape kits.
It happened in Bloomington, Eagan, Woodbury. Brainerd police destroyed dozens of untested rape kits, including Michelle Johnson's.
All the hope I had was the one thing I had left is gone. And
Killing her hopes of one day getting justice.
it breaks my heart.
Camille Cooper is VP of RAIN, the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization.
It's sort of a slap in the face to the survivors. It's also in direct contravention to the federal guidelines for the retention of rape kits.
These guidelines, enacted in 2017 by the Department of Justice, recommend rape kits from uncharged or unsolved cases be kept for 50 years. But when KARE 11 did a spot check, surveying 36 of Minnesota's more than 400 law enforcement agencies, we discovered 219 untested rape kits destroyed, 98 of them since 2017. In some cases, kits were destroyed only weeks after a rape was reported.
It's shocking.
State Representative Kelly Moeller is also a prosecutor.
It is very upsetting to know that these kits have been destroyed and really eliminating the chance for justice for these survivors.
Police agencies like Brainerd that are destroying rape kits defend the practice, saying it happens most in cases like Michelle's.
Suspect in the case said this sex was consensual.
No.
Police call them consent cases where both parties say sex occurred, so DNA won't solve their case. But that misses the big picture, says Duluth detective John Barrett.
It's not just to solve your own case, it may assist in another agency across the country that does not know who their perpetrator is.
Barrett is reinvestigating cases after Duluth DNA tested more than 500 old rape kits. He's making arrests, including in consent cases, and 3 suspects have been charged with multiple sex assaults.
From what you guys have seen, should cities be destroying kits?
I would say no. No.
Minnesota lawmakers tell KARE 11 they're planning to introduce legislation next week to mandate kits from all reported rapes be tested. So victims aren't forced to wonder, was their kit tested or just destroyed?
And it makes me so angry. Like, it's not okay.
KARE 11 typically does not name rape suspects who have not been charged, but we decided to in the case of Marcel McCullough because we felt his history provided important context to this report. We reached out to McCullough in prison seeking comment, but received no reply. And I'm joined now by my coworker Brandon Stahl, who's in our investigative unit and worked on this story. And Brandon, you discovered there's a major problem even for kits that have been DNA tested and are then destroyed.
That's right. Because of a nuance in Minnesota law, destroying a rape kit likely starts the clock on a statute of limitations to file charges, robbing other victims of a chance at justice.
And you can read Brandon's in-depth reporting on this issue on KARE11.com. Back to you.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. At the Capitol today, sweeping changes introduced for how the state deals with rape kits.
It comes in the wake of KARE 11's 6-month investigation, The Untested, which exposed how victims are often left in the dark as their rape kits go untested. Reporter AJ Legault is here to explain what it all means. AJ?
Randy, no more lost rape kits, no more miscounted rape kits, no more untested and destroyed rape kits, and an enhanced ability to identify serial predators. That's what the legislation introduced today would mean for Minnesota.
This is historic sweeping change.
State Representative Marion O'Neill holding a Capitol press conference to announce a bipartisan mandatory rape kit testing bill.
Every single one. Everyone will be accounted for. Everyone will be tested. Finally, victims will have justice.
For months, KARE 11's been exposing how victims' rape kits have been miscounted, not tested, and some kits, like Michelle Johnson's, have even been destroyed.
And it makes me so angry. Like, it's not okay.
Not okay. That message to lawmakers appears to have been received loud and clear.
There is no excuse for any delay. We should not deny justice to any sexual assault survivors.
The proposed law, which sailed through a first hearing today, would also create a statewide tracking system so victims will no longer be left in the dark as to what happened to their kit.
Tracking and appropriate storage is critical for eliminating potential biases from our systems, creating accountability, transparency, and consistency.
And even though it is not yet law, Representative O'Neill is calling on all law enforcement in Minnesota to stop destroying rape kits.
I hope that practice has stopped. I think that the news reporting has been pretty explicit as to how impactful that is to a victim.
Well, the lawmakers say testing all kits will also revolutionize law enforcement's ability to use DNA to identify serial predators across jurisdictions. And just to show how much support this bill has, there are now 23 co-authors listed on it in the House, both Republicans and Democrats, saying, let's get this done.
We're going to hear from some advocates fighting to change a state law that sets a statute of limitations on when a victim can seek legal justice. Here's Sharon.
On April 4th of 2019, Sarah Super stood behind Ramsey County officials who vowed to change how they respond to sexual assault.
Of all places to be assaulted, I'm grateful I was assaulted in one of the most progressive counties.
She never stopped working in the past year for rape victim survivor advocacy, except today, her focus was way bigger than Ramsey County.
By eliminating the statute of limitations, we are eliminating one barrier that hinders survivors from being heard.
A hearing on House File 734. Super talked about why getting rid of the statute of limitations was giving back choice that was taken away from victim survivors.
We also see survivors change their minds when someone else names their perpetrator. And so eliminating the statute of limitations not only gives survivors the choice to report if they're ready, when they're ready, but also allows them to change their minds of how they originally approached their assault if someone else names the same perpetrator.
Working alongside advocates like Asma Mohammed, advocacy director of Reviving the Islamic Sisterhood for Empowerment, also a victim survivor.
I was assaulted when I was 12 years old.
Mohammed says the current statute of limitations of 6 to 9 years flashed before her eyes before she could even come to terms with what had happened to her.
My time had long passed, right? But I can't report. And this man went on to hurt other people. And my testimony could never be used in a case against him. That's the reality of this bill, that it could change lives, it could change who sees justice.
Both Mohammed and Super clarified that the bill won't take effect retroactively, meaning its passage won't do much for them or for others like Laura Stearns, who has been vocal about her abuse during the years she spent as a teenager at the Children's Theater Company.
Why do you keep trying? Why do you care? Why is it important that you're here fighting for not yourself this time?
I do what I can to heal myself, and I want to create as solid a platform that I can for other victims moving forward so that they don't have to suffer in silence. They actually have a way to speak in a legal way that will support what they're saying.
This will only work on the assaults that happen going forward. And so with that in mind, I think we have widespread support, bipartisan support. I think when people think about their children, their families, the young people in their lives, I think that they can stand behind this bill with full faith that survivors deserve the choice to report whenever, if ever, they're ready.
Super, Mohammed, and as well as Stearns are hoping that with that bipartisan support for the bill, it would pass the House and eventually make its way to the Senate. And this isn't the first state to look at this. Illinois, the latest state to eliminate the statute of limitations for sex crimes. Nearly 844,000 women are victimized by alcohol or drug-facilitated rape. But get this. Our investigative team has discovered that these types of sexual assault cases are almost never prosecuted in the state of Minnesota. AJ, before we get to what you found, can you explain what the term means, drug or alcohol facilitated rape?
Sure. It means drugs or alcohol were used to compromise an individual's ability to consent to sexual activity.
All right, tonight, big investigation at 10. Let's start to talk about it. It's disturbing, but tell us what you found.
All right, in a nutshell, I'm going to try to explain it. It's a complex issue like most things are when you start talking about criminal justice. But Minnesota law basically says if a heavily intoxicated or drug victim is not fully passed out, asleep, unconscious, there's no way to prove the suspect knew they were physically helpless and unable to consent to the sex. We asked Corinne Long, a former Ramsey County sex crimes prosecutor, just what this means. Does the wording of Minnesota's sexual assault statute allow rapists to go free?
There's no other way to say it. Drunk victims are sexually assaulted, and it's almost impossible to hold the offender accountable when that happens.
We asked Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman how often this issue comes up, and he answered in 2 words. He said, too often.
Unbelievable. Yeah. You also found so-called date rape drugging cases. Those rarely charged in the state of Minnesota. Why is that?
There's 2 issues. One of them is tied to what we just talked about, problematic language in the law similar to the intoxication issue. And also, many date rape drugs metabolize extremely quickly. We asked the BCA Crime Lab for data showing how often they found a pair of the most common date rape drugs in a rape victim's toxicology. We were blown away by the answer. In the last 20 years, they told us they found GHB just 6 times, and they have never identified a case of Rohypnol being used.
Whoa, so they're not finding evidence of date rape drugs being used. Any sense of how often victims are reporting this happening? Like they go to the police and they say, something happened to me, I know something happened.
Yeah, tracking how often it's being reported is really tough. We were able to track how often it's prosecuted. We found one case in the last 5 years, yeah. But how often it happens? Well, we asked the Sexual Violence Center in Minneapolis, which covers 3 of the largest counties in the state. And their director, Kenesha Davenport, told us a third of all the cases they see involve victims who believed they were drugged. But she has, quote, never seen one of these cases result in prosecution.
This is where it gets to be disheartening, but it's why people like you do the work you do. Is anything being done to change this draconian law?
Well, there is a work group that's looking at this issue, but they're telling us that they're a year out from even making recommendations. It's really difficult to start revamping Minnesota's entire sexual assault law, but that's just what they say needs to be done.
Right, and you're going to look into this at 10,
We
correct?
are,
All right.
absolutely. Do you believe the wording of Minnesota's law is allowing rapists to go uncharged?
It's making it near impossible for us to successfully prosecute cases.
Nearly 1 in 10 women report being the victim of a drug or alcohol-facilitated rape. Yet investigative reporter AJ Legault discovers rapists in those types of cases are almost never brought to justice.
You can see them exiting the Monticello on the left. Now she is walking, as you can see. He's kind of holding her.
You're looking at dark and grainy surveillance video, never before seen publicly, that changed how rape is prosecuted, or we should say, not prosecuted in Minnesota.
This was a case where I felt she was physically helpless.
Mark Erickson is Assistant Wright County Attorney. He tried the 2011 case, which centers on a wedding reception held at the Monticello Community Center. He walked us through the footage.
She collapses, and she looks like she's on her knees and her hands, and he's clearly struggling to lift her up.
The man is the wedding photographer, Tane Finley. The woman, a 35-year-old mother of 2 and wedding guest.
It looks like he's almost dragging her.
They disappear inside his car for roughly 40 minutes.
Then they exit the car, and again she collapses.
A security guard approaches.
She's still lying there.
Erickson says Finley walks away and eventually leaves. Incoherent, unable to stand on her own, the woman had to be helped by other wedding guests to a hotel room. The woman would later tell police she'd had 4 drinks over a period of several hours and was not drunk. She thought she'd been drugged, left with little memory of what happened here outside the community center. The next day, she went to the hospital. A sex assault nurse performed a rape kit and found bruising and lacerations in her groin and upper thigh areas, and that she exhibited symptoms consistent with possible drug-facilitated assault. However, the BCA crime lab found no drugs in her system. That's not unusual. The most common date rape drugs metabolize extremely quickly and are rarely, if ever, detected, says former Ramsey County sex crimes prosecutor Corinne Long.
I am personally not aware of any investigation that has led to showing that GHB or one of the other common drugs was actually found in a toxicology examination.
In fact, when Kara Levin asked the BCA for data on 2 of the most common date rape drugs, we found in the last 20 years, they've gotten a hit for GHB only 6 times. And Rohypnol, they've never found it. The wedding photographer, when questioned by police, denied giving her anything or doing anything non-consensual. With the state lab finding no drugs and a victim who couldn't remember exactly what happened, the case likely would have been closed. But remember, there's this video showing the woman appearing to stumble and fall to the ground both before and after she was in Finley's car.
I mean, normally these cases you wouldn't have any kind of evidence like this.
Erickson brought sex assault charges against Finley, claiming the victim could not consent because she was physically helpless.
To me, the evidence is there.
After seeing the video, the jury agreed, convicting Finley of felony sex assault and gross misdemeanor non-consensual sexual contact. But the Minnesota Court of Appeals, in a ruling now known as State v. Finley, reversed the felony conviction. Why? It found, under Minnesota law, the woman did not meet the physically helpless standard.
That ruling has had a profound impact on sexual assault cases across the state. In essence, telling prosecutors that even an extremely intoxicated victim has to be asleep or unconscious in order to prove that a suspect knew they were physically helpless.
We have to turn a bunch of these cases down presently because we don't have someone who, in essence, has passed out.
Mike Freeman is Hennepin County attorney. He recently alluded to the problem when discussing the University of Minnesota wrestlers under investigation for sexual assault.
We will not be filing any criminal charges in this case.
He says Minnesota needs to change the law and points to Wisconsin. Their law allows for convictions where an intoxicated or drug victim is not passed out.
I believe there are cases in which women are violated that aren't yet passed out.
How often does this issue come up with you and your prosecutors?
Too often.
Back to Monticello and that wedding reception. Tane Finley, the photographer, is still convicted of misdemeanor sex assault. But because of his case, victims are less likely to get justice in Minnesota today.
It seems you clearly believe a sexual assault case happened here or you wouldn't have charged it. But if this same case landed on your desk today, would you bring charges?
Very likely not.
The victim in the wedding reception case, who asked not to be identified, tells us Minnesota needs to change its law, which currently enables predators. I'm joined now by investigative journalist Brandon Stahl, who partnered on this reporting. And Brandon, you found there's another major legal loophole, if you will, in drugging cases that's preventing rapists from being charged.
That's absolutely right. What we found is that under Minnesota's law, dealing with the sexual assault of victims under the influence of drugs, prescription, or even alcohol requires them to have been administered without the victim's agreement.
So if you voluntarily drank too much or even took your own prescription medicine and someone sexually assaulted you in that vulnerable state, it's difficult to charge them under Minnesota's law?
That's exactly right, AJ. What happens is our investigation found in the last 5 years, the drugging law has only been used once to get a sexual assault conviction.
Just once. You can read our complete investigation, including about efforts now being made to change Minnesota's rape laws on KARE11.com.
Thanks for joining us tonight. Our top story, a startling new finding today from the state's top police agency.
Less than half of all sexual assault reports in Minnesota actually result in a rape kit getting tested. AJ Legault joins us with the latest finding in our now 6-month investigation, The Untested.
Randy, Julie, we knew Minnesota was out of whack with federal guidelines and best practices that call for all rape kits to be DNA tested. But we had no idea how many sexual assault survivors were left with untested kits until we got our hands on this new report that details how much it's going to cost to bring Minnesota up to par.
Untested.
4 years. Over 4 years. Just sat there in a locker.
Miscounted.
I felt so dismissed.
Destroyed.
It makes me so angry.
Ask someone who's reported a sexual assault in Minnesota, and there's a good chance you'll get an earful about how their rape kit has been mishandled.
It is time for victims to have justice.
Representative Marion O'Neill leads a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers who are saying enough is enough, introducing a bill mandating all rape kits be tested.
The waiting time is over. We need to have justice right now.
That justice comes with a cost. This just-released fiscal note details the estimated $7.2 million it will cost over the next 3 years to test all new rape kits and create a statewide online database for victims to track exactly what's happened with their kit. The new fiscal report also contains a bombshell revelation. According to the BCA, currently less than half, just 46% of rapes reported in Minnesota result in a rape kit being tested.
We're extremely disappointed
but we are not shocked.
Jude Foster is with the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. She says it's possible there are some reported rapes where there's no kit to be tested, but that doesn't explain away what the new report reveals.
I think 46% is very, very disappointing.
The BCA estimates that testing all kits will result in an additional 1,500 kits a year for their lab.
If we can pass this legislation and we can fund it at the appropriate levels, it will send a very loud message to victims of rape. We hear you, we care, and we want justice for you too.
The multi-million-dollar question now is, will the legislature and Governor Walz include funding to test all kits in the budget? We'll keep you updated.
Now to an update on a KARE 11 investigation so important to so many of you. Efforts to reform how our state handles rape kits got some powerful backing today. AJ Legault reports on the latest developments in our 6-month investigation, The Untested.
It is appalling.
The man in Minnesota's most powerful office today lending his voice to demand change for survivors of sexual assault.
I bet if you asked the average Minnesotan that they would be appalled and could not imagine.
Governor Tim Walz echoing a growing bipartisan call for a bill that requires all rape kits be tested. Just yesterday, KARE 11 exposed BCA figures showing less than half, just 46% of rapes reported in Minnesota result in a rape kit being tested. A fact that left the governor shaking his head.
Is that acceptable?
It is totally unacceptable.
Testing all rape kits and creating an online database for victims to track exactly what's happened with their kit comes with a cost. An estimated $7.2 million over the next 3 years. And in politics, there's an old saying, don't tell me what you support, show me your budget.
Are you planning to put funds in your budget proposal to cover all kits being tested?
Yes. You can expect to see that.
With the latest on our continuing investigation, The Untested, at the Capitol, AJ Legault, KARE 11 News.
Well, the heavy toll of the COVID crisis is now extending to victims of sexual assault. Tonight, the latest chapter in KARE 11's ongoing investigation, The Untested. Here's investigative reporter AJ Legault.
At Minnesota's Capitol, the focus is all pandemic policy.
And unless it's directly related to COVID, it doesn't really have a chance right now. In fact,
GOP State Representative Marion O'Neill has been the driving force behind rape kit reform efforts that would close loopholes. KARE 11's investigation exposed how survivors had kits going untested.
4 years. Over 4 years. Just sat there in a locker.
Miscounted.
I felt so dismissed.
Even destroyed.
It makes me so angry.
Minnesota was finally ready to require the testing of all kits for victims who report a sexual assault. It was a done deal. The legislature and the governor were on board.
and then this COVID crisis happened. I'm devastated.
A spokesperson for Governor Walz tells KARE 11 the governor supports rape kit reform in the legislature, and it remains in his supplemental budget. He wants to be able to sign it this session. However, O'Neill says all legislation with fiscal components has been shelved. That includes rape kit reforms, which had an estimated $7.2 million price tag over the next 3 years.
We can't test all the kits without money attached, and we simply cannot obligate the state to more spending. This is a tremendous blow to victims.
For KARE 11 Investigates, I'm AJ Legault.
Don't let COVID-19 kill all rape kit reform measures. That was the message today to state leaders from a coalition of law enforcement and sexual assault advocates. With the latest developments in KARE 11's ongoing investigation, The Untested, here's reporter AJ Legault.
There's no straight answers with anything.
Tiffany Bowe found out the hard way that getting answers about your rape kit after you report a sexual assault is easier said than done in Minnesota.
Now it's just been a back and forth thing with trying to get information and figure out where it's at.
Last year, KARE 11 took you on a journey with Tiffany. After countless phone calls, she was eventually told to drive 40 minutes from home to the Sherburne County Attorney's Office to sign a special form.
This is the form.
Her story helped spark legislation to create an online system so sexual assault survivors would be able to easily track what was happening
with their kit.
Right now, we have a patchwork of inconsistent ways in which local communities are dealing with the actual storage and tracking.
Ramsey County Attorney John Choi, along with law enforcement partners and sexual assault advocates, held an online press conference urging state leaders to move forward with that tracking bill, as well as companion legislation to create centralized storage at the BCA of rape kits done at hospitals but not yet reported to law enforcement.
That would eliminate a lot of the backlogs and also eliminate the possibility that we may let one of these cases slip through the cracks and not do our due diligence for that victim.
Carol Evans' investigation found rape kits going untested, miscounted, and even destroyed. A big component of the proposed reforms called for testing all kits in cases reported to law enforcement. But it came with a hefty price tag. Last week, State Representative Marion O'Neill, the bill's author, told Carol Evans the cost of battling COVID-19 has torpedoed that.
And unless it's directly related to COVID, it doesn't really have a chance right now.
But there is still a chance to make meaningful reforms that don't carry a huge financial requirement, said the group, now joining forces to push for the tracking and storage measures to move forward.
This legislation really, really does matter.
For Carol Evans Investigates, I'm AJ Legault.
The COVID-19 pandemic wreaks havoc on Minnesota's finances. A Carol Evans investigation finds a state agency wildly overestimating the cost of helping rape victims seek justice. Here's investigative reporter AJ Legault with the latest in our year-long investigation, The Untested.
Untested.
4 years. Over 4 years. Just sat there in a locker.
Miscounted.
I felt so dismissed.
Destroyed.
It makes me so angry.
That's what Carol Evans' investigations exposed happening to thousands of rape kits in Minnesota. State leaders listened.
It is time for victims to have justice.
A bill to require DNA testing of rape kits was introduced. It had wide bipartisan support and was on the fast track. Then COVID hit. Now there are concerns about what it will cost. Public Safety Commissioner John Harrington recently laid it out for lawmakers.
Our request for this proposal is for a total of $3.096 million in fiscal year 2021.
$3 million next year. $2 million every year after. How that figure was reached is spelled out in this fiscal note by the BCA. But there's a problem.
It seemed like an overestimation.
Camille Cooper is Vice President of Public Policy for RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network.
Your number one takeaway after looking at the fiscal note?
I didn't think they did the math right.
The BCA estimates their forensic laboratory will receive an additional 1,500 cases for testing per year. The BCA's Drew Evans told lawmakers that means hiring new scientists.
How many employees are you looking at adding for that?
It's 8 scientists for DNA and then I believe 2 for the tracking portion.
In their budget estimate, the BCA said in 2019, statewide there were 2,763 reported rapes, but only 1,200 rape kits were submitted to test. So, BCA assumed they would receive an additional 1,500 cases for testing per year. They wrote, with this bill, all kits would be required to be submitted, which would include the vast majority of reported rape cases. But here's the issue. The BCA assumed that virtually all reported rape cases have a corresponding rape kit. Experts say that's never been true.
Those numbers are never going to match.
Cooper says that's in large part because rape kit exams need to be done within max 5 days of the assault, and many victims wait longer before reporting their rape.
The number of sexual assault kits is always going to be less than the total number of rapes reported.
The BCA repeatedly told Carol Evans there is no way they could tell how many cases included kits, so they had to plan accordingly. But what the BCA said couldn't be done was actually simple. Carol Evans just asked law enforcement around the state for data on how many reported rapes they had and how many of those actually had kits. Here's some examples. In 2018 and 2019, Duluth had 82 reported rapes, just 31 rape kits. Rochester, 209 reported rapes, 65 kits. St. Paul, 513 reported rapes,
349 rape kits. Our survey of 15 cities found just 49% of reported rapes have a corresponding rape kit. If that pattern holds, it means the BCA lab is looking at just 150 new rape kits to test per year, not 1,500. And the cost to taxpayers? Just a fraction of what the Public Safety Commissioner and BCA claimed.
And they're trying to make some pretty impactful reforms there in Minnesota. And one of the surest ways to kill a bill is to tack on a really high fiscal note.
For KARE 11 Investigates, reporting on The Untested, I'm AJ Legault.
KARE 11 requested interviews with both BCA Director Drew Evans and Public Safety Commissioner John Harrington. The commissioner's office never responded. The BCA director declined, but through a spokesperson sent a statement saying the BCA continues to support the proposed legislation. Well, with just days left for lawmakers to vote and financial concerns mounting, a KARE 11 investigation finds the state crime lab may still be overestimating the number of rape kits it will be required to test if new reform legislation is passed. Here's reporter AJ Legault with the update to our continuing investigation, The Untested.
Nobody's raised this concern prior to this report.
That's State Representative Kelly Moeller responding to KARE 11's investigation last week that raised serious questions about the accuracy of the BCA's $7.2 million budget estimate for a proposed new law requiring rape kits be DNA tested. The BCA director said much of that money would be needed to hire new scientists for the crime lab to test the additional kits.
8 scientists for DNA, and then I believe 2 for the tracking portion, which are technicians.
But when KARE 11 surveyed law enforcement across the state, we discovered less than half of reported rapes actually have corresponding kits. So the number of new tests would likely be far less than the 1,500 BCA claimed. After KARE 11's report, lawmakers asked the Legislative Budget Office to review the BCA's fiscal note. The LBO quickly found the BCA's assumptions about the number of kits that would be tested are reasonable.
Everybody wants to get this right because at the end of the day, this is about justice for victims of rape and for survivors to get justice.
Meanwhile, BCA Director Drew Evans fired back, sending this letter to lawmakers stating our report falsely alleged they had inflated the cost of rape kit testing. Evans writes there were additional considerations that informed their analysis. He cites a Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, MINCASA, survey about exam billings from 2016 that indicated statewide there were 2,337 sexual assault exams performed, far more than the 1,200 kits the crime lab tests on average per year. But there's still a problem. That MINCASA survey included rape exams not just for victims who reported to police, but also for those who chose not to and did not consent to having their kits tested. How often does that happen? The BCA states in their letter at least 800 to 1,000 kits are collected from unreported rapes annually. So let's do some simple math. Take the 2,337 rape exams performed. We'll be conservative and subtract 800 unreported exams. Subtract the 1,200 kits the BCA already tests per year, and you're left with 337 new kits needing DNA testing. Still, a far cry from the 1,500 new tests the BCA wants taxpayers to fund them for.
We don't have any money.
In a hearing today, lawmakers raised concern about the cost, given what COVID has done to the state's finances.
I just don't think that this is something that we can afford to do.
This leaves lots of questions lawmakers now need to sort out before their session ends this coming Sunday at midnight.
A pandemic should not mean that a rapist gets away with raping folks. I think everyone can agree on that.
For KARE 11 Investigates, reporting on The Untested, I'm AJ Legault.